Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. We're just going to go around the room and introduce ourselves, but we're joined by a special guest today. My name is Dan Gerstein. I'm one of the co-founders of Pistol Shrimp, and I worked at Toys for Bob for a bajillion years with Fred and Paul, and worked on several games, and now working on our, well, still code name, Ur-Quan Masters 2, sequel to Ur-Quan Masters, which we did announce the real name of, Free Stars, Children of Infinity. Fred?
I'm Fred Ford, co-founder of Pistol Shrimp, also co-founder of my partnership with Paul Ritchie, where we created the copyrighted work that was first expressed in 1992 and is now known as Ur-Quan Masters, and that was released in 2002.
And I'm
Richard
Cobbett. I'm a former games journalist turned games writer. Worked on things like Fallen London, Sunless Sea, Sunless Skies. Currently working on a game called Nighthawks, which is a vampire text-driven RPG. And I'm mostly on this one because a few years ago I wrote a game called The Long Journey Home, which was very much the game that is now referred to as the Ur-Quan Masters inspired.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us here. It's really nice to have you, and it's really nice to have someone whose focus is on the words, because we don't think about words at all. No, that's not true. But I did want to ask, like, what if you had your own personal experience with the Ur-Quan Masters? Like, did you have any experience with that before you worked on The Long Journey Home, or was that like, how did it go?
I mean, absolutely. In fact, I knew the original game from the early 90s. Back in the 90s, I was a big fan of it. I really loved the writing, kind of the universe design and so on. And ironically, when I was sort of talking to Andreas, who was the project manager on The Long Journey Home, we were kind of like doing the initial kind of like sometimes a freelancer. So we do like the initial chat, and he was sort of telling me like roughly what the company was trying to make, and what kind of direction they were kind of going in. And I basically got the job because I heard him describe the tone, and more or less said, so kind of the game now known as the Ur-Quan Masters meets Farscape. And I basically hit exactly the two right like touch points. It was like, yes, that is exactly right. Those are exactly the things we were looking for. That plus Commander Blood, and pretty much that largely got me the gig. So yeah, I'm very happy to have played both the original and the remake when it first came out as in the open source format. I think it's a fantastic game. I've long been a big fan of it. In particular, one of my big things as a games writer and like a writer in general is that I love characters. So if I'm playing like a sci-fi game, I want to feel like I'm in a living universe. And so the more that it's like, well, here's numbers and here's like a million star systems, doesn't really do anything for me. I want to meet the cool aliens. I want to have like fun adventures. I want to be doing interesting stuff. And certainly when we were designing a lot of the content for Long Journey Home, a lot of it was thinking back to like, the adventure with the Spathy or the Vux, or, even the Dak Tak Laptak, really kind of, going back to those fond memories. And
Sorry,
even before that, I think I can mention it by now. Prior to that, obviously, was it? I'm blanking on the name. Starflight.
Yeah.
Starflight. That's it.
Oh yeah,
Greg Johnson.
I was about to say Starfleet for some reason, but no, Starflight.
Greg Johnson's a brilliant designer. He helped us a lot with Ur-Quan Masters.
I mean, I just love the writing in the game. I think one of the moments where I first knew I was really going to like it when I first played it was when you go to the starbase at the start. I just have the option to say I'm going to call our new thing the Empire of Me, and just having the starbase commander being, if you gotta,
you're the captain if that's what you want.
And it was, for me, it's stuff like that which makes it's all about making a universe feel alive. And I loved that. I loved all the little details that kind of really went into that, right down to the way that even like the Ur-Quan have this sort of wonderful depth to them that you don't normally get. What again is one of my favorite moments of the game is when you're first getting into trouble with the Ur-Quan, and again, I'm massively paraphrase the conversation, but more or less you sort of say to them, well, I didn't know that this was a thing, and they just say, okay, well, ignorance is actually defense once. So just so we're clear, this is how it goes. If you do this again, we will blow you up. But I just love that idea that even like the bad guys of the franchise had that sort of sense of extra humanity and depth to them.
Yeah, they were actually a compelling bad guy because they had a sad story that was driving them, and you could empathize with them at some point. Or
I mean,
most.
certainly when you find out about the Denari, then is that how you pronounce
Yeah.
it, Denari?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you actually kind of like the full, what's going on. I just really liked. I love when you have like games like this which have the layers. So again with Long Journey Home, which I'm just going back to because obviously it's the closest to a Ur-Quan Masters game that I've worked on. We had this sort of idea that the universe was going to be a bit like an onion, where it was more of a roguelike than an RPG. So the idea was that you would do the journey, like say once, and great, I've got home, we're done. But then on repeated playthroughs, you would kind of peel back more of the universe and kind of find like sort of the hidden storylines and how all the pieces kind of work together. We had a lot of stuff, there to be discovered. And again, a lot of that does come from, things which I enjoyed in Ur-Quan Masters.
Do you feel that sort of depth was worth it? Did people discover all that? And
I mean, it was worth it to me.
yes,
I mean, as the writer, it was a game which honestly didn't do that well for various reasons. But the one thing which people did generally seem to like was the script, which is that's my bit. So that's I'll take that. And they were kind of hitting a lot of the references which I was hoping they were going to get in terms of, I thought these people were funny, but then I discovered actually there's like a big dark secret, or I didn't like these people at first, but again, like the Ur-Quan, when you kind of get to figure out what their deal is, then suddenly, okay, well, I now see that you're not just like wearing the evil hat, you have this this wider picture, and relatively good reasons for doing what you're doing, even if they're not necessarily great to the targets.
Yeah,
Honestly,
okay.
honestly, I thought that in Ur-Quan Masters they do. It's not that bad of a deal. Do you want to join as a soldiers, or do you want to stay on your home planet? It's
Yeah, and
it's not the
also
worst. It's not the worst choice.
totally, and also it helps them when there's an even more evil thing around, which is just like destroy everything, don't protect it, don't but like, would you like to stay in your safe snow globe for the rest of your life? That's actually sounds like a good deal, and there's
He would definitely agree.
yeah, they did in the game too. What is it? Shoot.
They were pranked by one of the other alien races who basically switched the thing around.
Yeah, they
saying
switched
that
the rods.
they want to be battle thralls rather than staying at home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I was trying to think of is it Childhood's End? Is that the book from the
Oh.
50s? Okay, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Is that the
yeah.
one where the aliens show up and they pretty much say, stay here on Earth, don't never fly into space, you will live a peaceful and prosperous life, I think.
I mean, Three Body Problem is kind of similar.
That's true,
with the
yeah.
whole idea of like the dark forest and
Yeah, stay quiet.
I just love that idea. You're sending out a message to the stars. The response basically comes back, never do that again.
Yeah.
I think it's like a
Yeah.
start for a story. That's an amazing one.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I don't, well, or maybe fortunately, I've heard differing opinions. I only read the first two books of that trilogy, so I don't know the full story yet. But I did, and I enjoyed the second book especially, and sort of how that went down. Sorry, we have some bird action. But what I was going to say is the Korra, the black ships being so much worse. So suddenly, what I appreciated in Ur-Quan Masters is not only do I have a villain who maybe is kind of looking after me in a weird way. I mean, yes, of course, it's like a gilded cage. I don't want to be in it necessarily, but they're also protecting me from something worse. And that worse thing sounds real bad. But one of the things I also appreciated, and I think I actually sometimes struggle to find this in other games, where there's a villain who wants to talk to me and talk to me at length and answer my questions and like almost be a diplomat in some ways for like our evil isn't so bad. You get more of the like or I see more, maybe it's easier to create a James Bond villain who's like, this is my master plan and I'm gonna soapbox about it and then do something to you, or just like I think as you said, or I'm paraphrasing you, which is just like I'm wearing the evil hat, right? I'm just bad. I'm doing bad things. So the Ur-Quan were relatable.
I mean, the problem tends to be that often people do too good a job of that, and so the villain actually ends up being too likable. I know there's a good case for that in actually they're both good examples. I like both of these games, but there was an example of that in the Tex Murphy game Overseer, where the villain basically wants to mind control the world, and it's the point where even the main character is kind of, we could have done worse. And to the point where, you know, how his story ends is actually quite bittersweet. And then conversely, I loved how Fallout New Vegas did it with Kaiser, where you got, and he's like, kind of, I'm not a complete dick. I will explain to you my philosophy. It's all about, you know, Hegelian dialectics, and it all sounds really, really good until you actually look at the details. It's like, hang on, no, you talk a good game, but you are evil, and you know, your entire empire is stupid. But again, intentionally, it's not, that's not intended as a knock on New Vegas. And again, I loved how that kind of went both ways. You're like, we're going to humanize the villain, but also actually he's full of crap if you listen to what he's saying,
you spend listening,
and you aren't impressed by the big words.
Yeah. BioShock felt similar to me when I was playing it, where in the beginning it's like, okay, idealistic villain, right? That's sort of the idea. Is, of course, I want to protect the world. You know, I'm an environmentalist, so I'm going to destroy all humans, and then the trees will be happy. Is sort of the oversimplified version. Of course, there's some political aspects to that too. But yeah, it helps. I mean, well, I like science fiction. It helps to have an alien is one other thing too, because then they don't have to act like a human. They can act in a different way. So I kind of want to ask you, you know, because you've done so much writing, like, do you approach writing an alien? Like, what is your approach? I said, hey, if I said, you're going to work on the Ur-Quan Masters too, we need you to write a character. They're this, they're an alien. They're not a human. How do you approach that? Like, what's do you have mechanisms?
I mean, it's sort of a bit like with a lot of design. You can either do top down or bottom up. So sometimes you have a really great idea for a species, and then it's like, right, but what do they do? And then sometimes like, I need this archetype, and then how do I make them interesting? And you know, and so we're sort of with the Long Journey Home, kind of like we sort of flipped them around a bit. So we sort of went like, what are the we had basically this. Let me just rewind a little bit to sort of say how the basic system worked, which was that every game was roguelike. And so we had, I think, 4 major empires, which were randomly selected from a pool of 8, I think. And then we had a number of minor races who would usually be there, and then they could kind of sort of fill in like the gaps and sort of do things. And so for the major races, they sort of tended to be a bit like the Planet of Hats sort of Star Trek thing. Like, okay, well, here are the mercantile ones, here are the fighty ones, here are the ones who are like comedy evil. And I basically sort of plan them out sorts of like that, whether then a couple of them were based around their storylines. And then for most of the minor races, because they didn't have to appear as much, they could be a bit, you know, wackier and crazy. So we had like the mad scientists who they were basically genetically engineered chicken creatures who were into auto-cannibalism. And they breed so well that they have no belief in like safety whatsoever. It's like, you know, if they die, they don't care because there's 100 more of them. And so they kind of tend to be a bit more of the now we do some wacky. Well, obviously one of the big advantages that Ur-Quan Masters has is that you, for the most part, and again I am, you know, simplifying, you kind of meet the alien races a couple of times, and they do their here's who we are and what we're up to spiel, and you don't really have that much to do with them later on, apart from using their spaceships. Whereas if you're going to be bumping into people all of the time, then you kind of can't get too crazy because people will forget what crazy thing you did. And so you have to have this like grounded level of, okay, you're the merchants. And I think and kind of like on top of that is like kind of the fun stuff. But you have that sort of baseline of like, I roughly know what I'm going to get from you. And then it's all about the details. So in this case, for example, If you had like drugs and slaves, then the noble like knightly race would be against you on moral grounds. And so it's like kind of, okay, so I know that you're the night people, I know that you disapprove of crime, and then on top of that we could put in the fun stuff. And so that's kind of how I sort of did most of them. But then we had others, like we had one race which I was very pleased with called the Mizrahi. And the Mizrahi's thing is that they're basically the friendliest aliens in the universe. They are also a highly infectious virus. And so basically they fly up to you and they give you presents, but the presents are sort of full of like Mizrahi spores and things like that. And if you get kind of caught by other people like carrying these things, you get into a whole lot of trouble. And their entire thing was basically I'd written the storyline for what these guys were up to and like what this sort of what are the bigger mysteries was going to be. And they started off very much as like the bottom down thing. Like I think this will be fun. And then how do I integrate them into, the other stuff? So long-winded answer,
Cool.
but yes,
No, that's awesome.
It depends.
Well, what was it like on that project? Like, what was the process like? Were you given sort of opportunity, like saying, hey, this alien needs to do X, Y, and Z or serve this archetype? Like, how did it go? Was it case by case? Was it given in a top-down way, or was it meeting the middle?
I was a freelancer, so I was kind of working remotely, and we sort of did. I mean, to be honest, I actually had a ton more freedom than you normally get on these projects, and that more or less, if I designed something, they would make it. But so they had a few which were like, we've already done this art, can you do something with it? But mostly it was like kind of, I think this would be a cool concept, and then like a couple of months later it'd be like, we made this, come and take a look. And they were very good about putting in some of the really stupid ideas and crazy wacky things, because it was a lot of it for me is like is I think that it's important to keep the players surprised. That's sort of like one of my big sort of like design templates. I think you can very quickly get into a rut. And so I always would try to like have the player not too far away from something they're not expecting, which can be funny, it can be dramatic, it can be like a character moment. So just for example, one of the early potential quests you can get on the long journey home, which was one of those, I cannot believe that, how did we get away with this, is that you basically have like the like sort of the Ferengi sort of style merchants, the Glucked, ask if they can do a scan of your crew for medical research purposes, and you could agree and you can submit one of your crew members to be scanned by this alien race. And then a couple of systems later, you find that what they've actually done is use that scan to create alien pornography starring the crew member that you submitted. Each of which has a different awful pun. Like we've got a character called Ash, and so one of them is like Ash's Sin Creed and things like that. And they're all like parodies of various things like that. Which was a rare case of kind of like, yeah, I know this doesn't make any sense in terms of the fact that they're aliens, but it's funny and people aren't expecting it. And so a lot of the design was again like that, like the one of the more comedic alien races, the Quaidask, who are basically the religious kind of aliens, more or less. They basically take the form of these two guys who sort of talk over each other all the time, internally known as Chet and Borkney for some reason. And they're basically like sort of like Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, like sort of spreading the good word of ascension. And then you find out that actually like their backstory is really dark and ties into like all of this sort of stuff involving like ancient wars and like the rise of sort of these sort of space dragon things, and and you sort of have to put the pieces together from like 5 different sources to figure out exactly what's going on. Like you got one species which only exists now as ruins. We have like 5 species who'd left behind their ruins, worship these dragons, which were like metaphors for sort of various things. But one of them, which was famine, all of the statues have been destroyed, and you find out that they're then linked to another race's thing, and that's linked to another thing. And ultimately, the Quaidas turn out to be like energy beings whose ancestors, who are much less funny, were basically defeated in this epic war, and were basically pressed into eternal service as batteries for the jump gates that you've been using for the entire game. And so, stuff like that, I thought was, it was important to kind of keep surprising the player and, like giving them new, stuff to look into and maybe like, file away for later.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the challenges, like I love that we have interactive fiction. I mean, it's even a genre, and
Oh, God,
walking
yeah.
simulator. We've created these words for games, which maybe, I mean, I don't know, genres are a whole topic of discussion, but as you're talking about this, there are these like amazing stories, right? That we want the player to have and they want the player to experience. And then we also have games, which are roguelikes. And like you said, the onion, you might not get the whole story the first time. When you said you got your start in journalism, right? So you started writing linear media. What was the transition from linear writing formats into like interactive formats like, and how did you, what was that learning process like? And how would you say, like, as a writer, I really want you to know this story, but I can't give it to you all at once, or it's an interactive story and the player's involved. It's very different than like, hey, read this book, it's got a good story. Like, what was a learning process and transition like for you?
Well, I'm very lucky in that mostly I've been able to kind of like do projects as a narrative designer rather than just pure writer, and a lot of the time that's meant that I'm making my own mechanics. So like when I worked on games like Sunless Sea and Sunless Sky, the way that it would work is that they would, this is a freelancer, obviously, they would basically have like a very wide kind of open brief. So it'd be like, we want this island to be about this. And it'd be a punchy thing. It'd be like a couple of sentences, and then I would then go away and I would actually think, well, okay, well, what can I do which is interesting with this? What mechanics can I work in? What characters can we implement with this? And I would kind of come back having like actually designed a chunk of game. And then obviously we go back and forth and we kind of like, if they have things which need to be worked in from elsewhere, or, things they would rather like, we not touch because like they're being done in another part of the game, then obviously we would pull things in and change things around. And they were always made much better for that input. But it also meant that I was in a good position from very early on to be, here, if this is my tool set, what can I do with these tools? And I've always really enjoyed trying to sort of take the tools to like the widest lens that I can. So I did a thing, for example, with Fallen London, which is basically a I should add that if anybody's going to write for Fallen London, do not do this. This is a terrible idea. I basically wrote a storyline where you were trapped in a house. And so using a system which was not written for this, we basically had time passing. We had NPCs moving around the house. We had the most. I am so sorry to the testers because I think I gave them all like cranial hemorrhaging, but for me it was like that was fun. It was like what can I do with this which people haven't seen before, and and so kind of a lot of the time I think with gaming stuff, it's how do you turn story into mechanics rather than just, and now you'll have a 10-hour long conversation in which you will behold my genius. And so a lot of it is like, well, is there a way that we can do, like, for example, can we trigger something based on an inventory item? Can we trigger something based on time? Can we trigger something based on like past interaction with somebody else? Like if you've lied to a lot of people, can we track that? And so the next time you do it, the guy's like, yeah, but we all know that you lie. And I think that for the most part, it doesn't take much to really kind of catch a player's attention. I mean, the example which I always like to give is the start of Deus Ex. If you go into the ladies' toilets, you get shouted at about it, and it's brought up a couple of times later on in the game. And I would argue that moment, more people remember than anything about the actual story. Yep. Or Leather Goddesses of Phobos, ancient text adventure. I defy anybody to tell me something about that game which isn't designed by Steve Moretsky, or you do your gender choice by choosing a toilet at the start of the game. Other non-toilet examples are also available, but those are just like two which sort of come to mind. And I tend to think that it's the moments where the player feels personally invested are if they've done something. And it doesn't have to be doing very much, but if it's just like choosing every option in a like a list of things, then that doesn't work. And or if it's being forced to do something, that doesn't work. I'll give you a good example. Fable 3 had this gimmick where the point of the game was meant to be that like that ruling is difficult. And so the entire gimmick was essentially the first half of the game, you basically get lots and lots of favors of people, which you're then supposed to realize you can't actually fulfill because ruling is hard. And the trouble is that doesn't work, because at no point are you given a choice about actually like asking for those favors. You just get like a big screen thing pops up and it says press A to do the thing. And it's like, you didn't give me a choice, so I don't care. Whereas conversely, if you're playing a game and say, for example, Dragon Age 2, if you've got a scene where you're trying to get two of your party members together and you fail at that, then you feel bad, you know, because you actually want that to happen. You're personally tied to the success of that. And I think it goes, you know, and I think it's an element which seems obvious, but is often very overlooked, partly because often the writing for games and the design of games is sort of done completely separately outside of the indie world. And so, you know, if you're coming in as a scriptwriter, you just don't have that power. You know, you might think you might have like loads of great ideas, but you have no authority. And chances are whoever is running the main project isn't going to be that interested unless it's an idea which they've come up with on the design side for making the storyline tie into something in a cool way. And so, like a lot of the time, you sort of end up with this sort of, you know, or reading a review afterwards, and people will be sort of saying, you know, well, you know, it seemed weird you couldn't do that, and it's like, yeah, I know, but you know,
yeah, they got done in
did you
different
laugh?
rooms.
Did I make you laugh? That's the you know, that part I can take ownership of.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, like working backwards through a lot of that stuff. There's one experience we just had actually where we have kind of a high level outline of the different races we're having in this game, and you know, there are one of the categorizations for them is, can you become their friends, right? Will you become their friends? And also, what do you get when you become their friends? And in Ur-Quan Masters, it was usually just their ship, right? You get their ship, and maybe there's a few other little things that would happen, like you can move their sphere of influence around, you could take the like third ash, the rhino, you know, characters and sick them on the Ilrath and deal with the problem. So effectively, you know, I mean, we tease ourselves with it a little bit. Every you know, everyone's just a lock and there's a key and you just need the, you know, you need the key and then it unlocks the lock. Hooray, that's actually game design. Wow, we just distilled it. It's so boring, but there's a lot of theater. And so one of the things that just happened on this project is there was a race, and this might change before release, so I'm being totally specious on purpose, but it's like, or secretive on purpose, but there was a race that's like, they're evil, you can never become their friends. And then our writer, who put together what I will say honestly was a placeholder, the ask was, hey, we need a placeholder conversation, it needs to do X, Y, and Z, right? But the writer was having so much fun that they wrote, you know, a few other letters into the script. And I saw it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. We have to do this. I thought you were never going to be their friends, but the writer found a very like creative and weird way to become friends with them. And I said, this totally informs a bunch of game design. We didn't ask for it, but the fact that I got that early before anything was set in stone, you know, made it really helpful. And one challenge I think we've been having on our project, just to be totally open about it, is understanding that writing is better when it collaborates with design, and design is better when it collaborates with writing, and that's what we want to do. It's not like, I think people, maybe especially from outside games, think it's very top down. There's one, you know, there's a vision, and then there's this totally clear vision, and all we need to do is color by numbers and fill in all the boxes, and then it's going to work. But actually, we learn a lot as we go, and I think like I've found just we have people who are helping us on this who have never worked on a game before, which is very interesting. And one of the biggest, you know, kind of educational moments for them is realizing just how iterative it is and just how little we know until we know it, and how much we get to discover along the way. And I would just say, like, I was talking to someone about this just last week, and, you know, I was talking to her and saying like, yeah, talking about what is a creative environment. A creative environment is necessarily fluid between bottom up and top down, because if you're creating, if you knew the answer, you wouldn't be creative. It would just be done, or you would do it and go do the work, go clean the kitchen, go clean the toilet, whatever, just do that. If that's not creativity, creativity is allowing yourself to discover, you know, I think it's like, it's allowing yourself to discover that, but it's important for the team to understand that too, which is, I don't have the answer. I want your answer. I want my answer. I want the artist's answer. I want all of our answers, and then put it all together and say what is going to work of all of our different answers. And, the back half of that, which I also find curious if you've had experience with this, is getting people to be okay throwing away their work is like, for me, an intrinsic part of my creativity and like my design process is like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it as fast as possible and get it in front of someone, maybe just myself if I have no one to show it, but find out, is this any good? And then get feedback on it and throw it away if it's not good, and just go on and make something else, make something else. Because, the best idea is probably not my first idea. It's usually, for me anyway, it's like a later idea. And I find working collaboratively, especially with people in other disciplines, right, who aren't thinking design, they're thinking writing, and getting to see, like, I would call it ping pong, can I kick something over from the design side that makes a writer go, oh yeah, I can work with that? And can they launch it back at me with more velocity? And can I launch it back at them with more velocity? And if that doesn't happen, it's like, this probably isn't the most exciting thing, or there's something better, So
No,
I don't know what sort of collaborating has felt like to you, but I feel like there's both an educational element, I've worked in games for a while, so sometimes, first time people, we need to like elevate them and understand what that's like and get them excited. And then also like, hey, being okay with throwing away your work, like for me, that that I learned that fast, maybe because I don't know, I got used to game development, but it seems like a something to get people comfortable with, which isn't always easy.
I mean, one of the things which I quite like about a lot of the games I've been fortunate enough to work on, and my current one, I'm sort of actually heading up, so I'm programming it and designing it and writing it, is I'm very fine about throwing away my own work. I feel very guilty about asking somebody else to throw away theirs. But and so like I like the more that I can do myself, not because I'm necessarily the best person to do it, but because I can throw stuff at the wall without guilt. And it's like, if I think this is going to be funny, but if it's not funny, nobody else has wasted their time. And one of the things which I always do when I start a freelance project is it's a question is like, am I working with you or am I working for you? And I think the difference between those things is massive. And either is fine. I don't mind either. But basically, if I'm working for you, then you are sending me a brief and I'm fulfilling the brief, and I will send you the brief and I will cash my check. If I'm working with you, then it's more about like tossing ideas back and forward. It's, this is a crap version of what you've asked for so that we can figure out together what the good version is. It's, suggesting things kind of on the fly. It's basically being much more directly involved, and trying to make the game as good as I can from the perspective that I can offer. And some teams want that, some teams don't want that, and that's fine. If I like to, but the second one is definitely the most fun. I mean, it's the kind
I was just about to ask. I think I can tell which one you like the most.
Well, I mean, I like the challenge of this stuff. Like I'm fairly certain if somebody asks me, can you write us a funny conversation, then I can write you a funny conversation. But if it's not my thing, then I probably don't have any like burning like ideas for what that should be. It's like I'm kind of like, sort of scientifically, okay, I have digested the lore. I shall now sit here for a few minutes. I believe that I have come up with something which may be risible. Whereas conversely, if it's like one of my own, then usually I've got like buzzing with like, this is why I came up with these people, because I've got like lots of cool things we can do. And
good.
And I think that for the most part, the big thing for me with games over every other genre, and every other genre does this as well, but I think with games it's much more the case, is you don't know what people are going to resonate with until it happens. And so you end up with cases like, say, I don't know, Far Cry 3, where the character that everybody likes is killed halfway through the game because he's not intended to be the main villain. And so like Bioshock could be a good example, how little people like Atlas. And so when you kind of get to the end of the game, it's like, well, I don't care anymore. Or it can often be, a perspective thing, which I one thing I often point to is to new writers, what I refer to as the proximity trap, which is where a thing might not be problematic in and of itself, but you put it next to something, and suddenly, boom. And
Yes.
again, to use Bioshock is one of the examples I give. Because I think Bioshock 2 is a much better written game than Bioshock 1. I think Bioshock 2 is I like the fact that Bioshock 2 has been reevaluated over the years and like now gets its proper due. But one of the things which is in Bioshock 1 is you can make a very good moral argument for killing every little sister you encounter for most of the game. The only point where that stops is when you actually go behind the scenes and you see the full picture. Until that point, I'm not saying it's a nice thing to do, but I'm saying you can make a moral argument, that you are freeing them from the trouble, that they have nothing, to live for, that they're going to face worse if you don't do it. That there are arguments to be made. And that game, I think, needed somebody to point out that the character who guilt trips you over killing even one little sister and gives you no chance to atone for it is a former concentration camp doctor whose entire personal story is about trying to atone. And so you end up with these sort of situations of quite often you're playing games and, the developers will sometimes run, but sometimes it just straight up is you do not realize what you've written until somebody else points it out and sort of says, but, and that can be, do you have any idea how, racist this is, or how, or like your attempt to make this particular game is actually clearly set in an American city or something like that, even though it's actually meant to be Prague, or or whatever the case may be. I think you quite often need, though, you don't know this stuff when you're sort of sitting and it's like you always do it with good faith. You're always trying to make the best game possible, but you find while writing the game, well, actually, your sidekick character is about as funny as a hernia, or the main character has no, chemistry with the love interest, but they do have chemistry with their best friend, who was never kind of written in with that kind of. And if you can catch that early enough, then you can roll with that. You can really kind of make something of it. And if you only kind of realize towards the end, well, you've done the art, you've done the voices, you've written the script, you're pot committed to something which now everybody on the team agrees doesn't work. And I think that it is. I think for me, one of the big mistakes that people make with games writing, certainly in terms of like writing about it, obviously within the industry, less it's not. This isn't exactly like great wisdom from the heavens or anything. The small stuff is what matters. Like nobody cares about the big plot. The universe is going to be destroyed. Do not care, because if I win the game, firstly, I don't live there, so not my problem. Secondly, the way that games work, you can be relatively certain that problem is going to be sorted out by the end of the story. What people care about is how does their romantic character like them? Did they get to go on a date with Tifa rather than Aerith? Did a particular character they like, die horribly, or did they go forth and like live those are the moments which kind of like ring with people, but you can't know what they are until people have played the game, or at least other people have read the script, or people have like played through the thing. They've sort of seen how you're making it all work. And I think that a crucial thing is that the writer is not necessarily the person who should be, the only person who's saying that. Like yeah. The art team, can tell you if that doesn't work. Like the sound guy, might have a brilliant idea for something. And I think that the more you can kind of get that interplay kind of going, so that everybody's sort of feeding in and kind of giving these different perspectives. Obviously, at some point, somebody has to be the one who's like kind of, okay, well, I'm now going to make the decision. But I think until that point, I think the more buy-in and suggestions and, maybe we could do this, or is it possible to do this, or like, how hard would it be to do this? And I want to, again, to use Long Journey Home, one of my favorite examples of that is crew banter. That as you're flying around, your crew kind of like talks to each other at the bottom of the screen. And this was originally not in the game. This was originally kind of basically there as a way of kind of giving the player like some feedback without like making them go to a different screen. So like character be like, we're running short on fuel, or I'm still feeling a bit ill. I'll have to like pass out the next one. But looking at it, like kind of like, oh my god, this is amazing. And in fact, the game which really inspired me on top of the ones we've mentioned already was a game called Sci-Fi Trading Company, which I don't know if anybody remembers. This is a bit of a deep pull. It was an early PC and other kind of platform trading game, but the cool thing is that you could see all of the members of your crew on the different screens. And as they died, as you took damage, those screens would get disabled. And so you wouldn't be able to talk to them anymore, and you wouldn't be able to see them, and they wouldn't be kind of doing all this sort of stuff. And this is a game which really stuck with me. And so as soon as I saw that they'd kind of coded in this feedback method, it was like, can I play with this? And so we sort of suddenly became having this sort of situation of like characters talking about inventory items or like past quests and like different versions depending on who'd done the quests. And like at the midpoint of the game, they get a whole new chunk of dialogue to represent that they've changed as people over the course of the journey and kind of sort of seeing all of this other sort of stuff. And I think I may have given poor Andreas an aneurysm because he saw how much I'd written. It was like, Richard, we have to translate this, and we have a translation budget, and we have like 5 languages to translate this into. It's like, yeah, I got a bit carried away because we ended up with hundreds of these lines of just the crew just bantering about stuff. Like I think we were probably the only space game which has inserted a reference to the British sitcom Come Back, Mrs. Noah, and has an entire plot arc about the fact that the ship launched before the entertainment was installed. So the only movie they have to watch is the public domain Catwomen of the Moon, which they've got on a repeat to the point that if anybody plays it again, they are going to get murdered. So, but again, it's just one of those cases of, this gave us this ability to give the characters, this sense that they're actually real people. They're going through something, as well as, again, surprises. What they're talking about is often quite funny because it could be anything from like experiences an alien orgy to I'm investigating this fascinating plant that we discovered.
Yeah, but it sounds like the feature got traction. It was interesting. It was fun, and the team liked it. So you found ways to like keep it rolling, but you had to try it first.
It was one of those features where, like, if I'd suggested it, it would never have been implemented because it was far too much work. But once we had that initial, here's a cool thing, and it kind of became, okay, how can we play with this? Suddenly, and we had loads of these ideas. Like we had, as you play through the game. Any inventory items you get, you can actually see on the ship when you can look at the crew quarter. And so by the end of the game, you've basically got this like museum of like random alien stuff just sort of taking up all of your space. And again, it was just like initially it was only going to be a couple of things, but people really dug it, and it kind of became this sort of cool, like, can you get all of the stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, but you tried it, and try early, try often, fail quickly, to use the tired phrase, but like that seems like the way to do it. But
I mean, again, a lot of the time I work for a company called Fail Better, and they're for
I played Sunless Skies,
and that is very much their kind of their thing. Like, go for it. And I think one of the big things which I've always really loved about working with them is that they take the approach that if we're interested in working with you, it's because we want to see what you can bring. That if we just wanted to write what we would do, we would have done that. So what can you do which we wouldn't have thought of? And I love that as a starting point for a freelance gig.
Yeah, that's those are actually words out of our mouths, because some of our sources, I mean, Ur-Quan Masters has a long, history, and it has like a really cool fan community that's been built up, and the open source releases kind of helped keep it alive. It's still being modded and all kinds of crazy things, but I don't know if I'll get to do it, but this month I'm hoping to write a blog post, and one section header that lives in my head is from fan to creator. What does the conversion process look like? Because obviously there's fan fiction, there's rich fan fiction about everything, and fan fiction is its own genre. I mean, arguably, right? There's just a whole universe there. And so when I still remember a conversation with a writer onboarding them, and they were kind of talking about all the things that existed in the previous game. Oh, I could use this thing, and I could use this thing, and here's all these parts, like from an already built car, basically, and they're rummaging around for the parts. And we said to them, like, look, we already built that car. You're here because I want to know what car you would build. I want to know what you would do with this. And exactly what you said, which is like, you're not just a fan anymore. I'm really glad that you're a fan of this thing. I'm a fan of a lot of games and literature and all kinds of things, but I want to use that to say something else. And that's what I want to share. And so getting them to understand like, hey, your information, your ideas, your creativity, even if it doesn't work, that's why you're here, or else we wouldn't have talked to you. We would have just found a writer on Fiverr or whatever and just said, okay, yeah, the cash the check person, right? It's like, look, you obviously, and we've seen the writing, right? And it's like, okay, this is really cool. What's your version? Take your spin on this new stuff, and converting them into that, even that mindset. I mean, it's more human psychology than anything. Like, hey, we want you because you're a creative person. Part of being creative is surprise us. We don't know what you're going to do, and that's why we have you. If we knew what we wanted you to do, it wouldn't be creative.
I mean, it's the problem that the new Star Trek series have, in that certainly even like Brave New Worlds is a good show. It's a really well-made show, but it's not a show about space exploration. It's a show about Star Trek. And like every single story is a callback to something which they did in the 60s or the 80s or the 2000s. It's like, can we not do something new? And I've always sort of taken this view that there is no greater compliment than you can give to a thing you love than to make it more than you encountered it. I believe that it's your duty, obviously not to just go in like with a sledgehammer and like, I can do it better, but you should always try to leave it better than you found it. And that is literally, what haven't they thought of? What kinds of aliens weren't there? What kind of storylines didn't it get a chance to tell? With that storyline, and what crazy stuff you got? Because even if the crazy thing doesn't work, it can spark off some idea in somebody else. One of the biggest problems with being a freelancer is that you're always kind of like working with this sort of under this sort of hammer that the first thing that you do has to be good. And so you end up with this sort of sense of like, if I submit something bad, then I will never get work from these people again. And unfortunately, this is not an unreasonable like response to to being a freelancer, because quite often people will just blank you. And you don't often get this sort of great situation where you can actually sort of say to people, I don't know if there's anything here, because what you're saying to them is, I have now taken money from you to maybe not do what you asked. And that's a really difficult, like, professional conversation to have, unless you're incredibly comfortable with the people who you're working with. And obviously, most of the time you aren't, because you don't necessarily know them. You've maybe never met them. You've never worked on a previous project. You don't know if you have the leeway to like make yourself a noose, or if you're just going to get blacklisted. And so one of the things I've been very lucky to have the opportunity to work with, like a lot of teams who are very explicit, like, we are not expecting a polished, perfect thing from your first submission. We just want to get an idea, like it was a one-page pitch. And if the pitch sells it, we will do it. If it doesn't, okay, maybe pull it back, try again. And if it's not working on maybe the third or fourth time, then okay, then maybe we have an issue. But we're at least going to have this opportunity to figure out something which excites both of us, that we would want to see, we would want to play, and then that's a ripple effect, because if it's something which you love doing, then people are going to like playing it more. I've always had this thing like, when I'm writing a script, that if I write a script which is fun to perform, that will come through in the performance. It'll be more fun to listen to. If I come up with a character who is fun to draw, then the art team is going to be like, kind of, oh, we can go crazy, we can do all of this cool stuff, and they're going to look cooler in the final game. Everything is better for an idea that excites you. As long as you kind of as long as you have like the ability and the willingness to kind of like look at it a week later and kind of go, actually, I don't know what I was thinking. That's terrible.
But you also need the trust, and what you're talking about, it's like a two-way street. And I'll say, absolutely, as a person in the position, of like working with contractors to try to get work, actually we have the problem going the opposite direction, which is they're doing too good a job. And they put too much work in to try to make something really good because they want to impress us. And I get it. Look, I totally get it. Especially when you're talking about, like, I get it also. Having never done too much contract work, well, indie contract work anyway, I don't know what having the, axe over my head feels like, so to speak, and this is at least my first time working on indie games, which is really fun for me. But I don't really know what that feels like. And in coaching people down from perfection, and it goes along with kind of what I was talking about, which is don't get it right the first time. Get ready to throw it away. That's put in less work to get more feedback, more collaboration, more output, because like you said, you never know when something's going to spark something. And that example I gave earlier is really true, which is I asked for a placeholder conversation and someone's placeholder conversation sparked a new idea. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. More of this, please. So actually, coaching people
almost
into being
nothing
less. Sorry.
Almost nothing which I kind of come up with is that form when I'm done. Like in Nighthawks, for instance, we have a large cast of characters, and I could go back to my original plan, and like most of them, a lot of the cases, it was just like when I started writing them, this doesn't work. Like we had one character, for instance, called Veronica, and it's a vampire game. So kind of her original thing was that she was going to be basically a sociopath. That her thing was going to be that she was she was an artist who did torture as her form of art, on the grounds that if art stirs the emotions, what stirs the emotion more than pain? And it was like it was a quirky idea, but like as soon as I started writing the character, like, this isn't Veronica. And so what we actually ended up with is that she's still an artist, but now she's basically like a forger. She's asexual. She's her entire storyline kind of revolves around being like emancipation from her evil family or whatever. And like none of the original stuff stayed, except for like the casual thing that here we have a woman called Veronica. She is super rich and she's good at painting. But you have to start making the thing to know what it is that you're making, and I think that certainly one of the big advantages of at the time when things like the game now known as the Ur-Quan Masters was being made, is that there was a lot more scope for like smaller teams basically being involved all over the place and just throwing stuff at the wall and playing. Whereas now, obviously, everything has to be budgeted, and you can't be anything like as playful. When it's like, well, I'm going to schedule 2 days of playtime, and then we go straight into into full production. And if you try, you sort of sound like a character from Dilbert or something. It's like it just doesn't work.
Well, I was telling somebody that back then there were no genres yet, and so there were no recipes for how to make things. So you had to throw things against the wall because no one had shown you how to do it yet, and that's very different from today.
Yeah, well, I always loved the talk from sorry, let me jump in. I always loved the talk from the original LucasArts adventure games, where they were saying that they were like there at like 2 a.m. eating pizza and just typing dialogue straight into the game. And I love doing that. I mean, apart from the pizza thing, and if you are, if, I must say, if it's a freelance, you ask me to be like working at 2 a.m., then no. But if I'm doing this on my own project or something like that, that thing where you can just try something and see how it works in situ is the most powerful thing that you can have as a designer. Because if you're writing it in script form, or God forbid Excel or something like that, you will never get the flavor of how it's coming across, because timing, the length of sentences, how much you're seeing at once, the context before that conversation started, all of this stuff, plays into, how you're actually going to, experience the content. And so the more power that somebody can be given to play with the actual game, and like actually, even if later on it's going to be dumped into an Excel chart or whatever, but if you can see it live on the screen, you get such a better understanding of how what you've made is going to land.
Yeah, hard agree, 110% agree, and so I think there's technical challenges sometimes that make it hard to do that. And I even remember, having like getting artists to play games, has been a challenge in every project I've worked, because they're like, I'm just an artist, I don't need to play. Like, no, you do. You'd learn more in 5 minutes of playing to see what the material you're doing is
Mm.
you've created is doing to your own game experience. And so getting people to have a personal relationship with their creation, not just as I'm the artist or I'm the writer, but I'm a player of the game too. And I sort of like designer is almost the most loosely defined term, maybe producer too, in like game development, in my opinion. But it's just like, that's one of the more loose terms. And it's like, everyone can be a designer. And even to like what you were talking about earlier, anybody could have a good idea. What I think, you know, I've seen this on so many projects where sometimes if people allow themselves to have distance from it and say, that's not my job, then it kind of, I don't want to say it harms the project, but it's a disservice to their own ability and their own skill. And, you know, go ahead.
I think one of the big problems, though, is that the industry as a whole has kind of discouraged that kind of personal investment, you know, moving away from, I'm not necessarily auteurs and, you know, like that kind of sense, but the sense of like you are one name amongst many, but it's actually the studio that made it or whatever. Because in that kind of situation, I probably wouldn't care as much either. If it was, if it was just, but if it's my own thing, it's a smaller project where you actually feel ownership over your kind of parts of it. I think it's much easier to kind of get into that sort of sense. But I often know this when I'm talking to people who are contributing things. Like I don't know when we were doing voices for Nighthawks. We had a couple of our voiceover people being surprised when I sort of said, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to chat. It's like, really? It's like, yeah, of course. Because, or when I did the Long Journey Home, one of the things which we did was, which I did, which wasn't technically part of my job description, but because we were being translated into about like 5 or 6 different languages, I put together basically a full translator guide. Because obviously most of the individual words are gibberish. I mean, they're many of them are made up by using the classic method of type consonant vowel, consonant vowel, consonant vowel, because that gets you something which is pronounceable, and then keep doing it until it sounds good. And so saying to I kind of put together this sort of big document of, this is what Valkor Gru is, this is the names of the alien races or whatever. And again, we have people also say like they aren't used to that, and it's like, but from my point of view, I'm giving you the tools that you need to do your job as well as you can. That's good for me, because the better you can do your job, the better my stuff looks. I have a vested interest.
It's our project.
In you sounding, looking and sounding good, and like knowing your characters and knowing the backstories and kind of all of this. And I'm always amazed when you get people who just sort of shrug that stuff off, and it's like, well, it doesn't really matter because they can perform the line, or like, it doesn't matter because the person could, would, if they're a good actor, they could perform the line just from an Excel chart. And, well, yeah, they can. There are amazing voice actors who work with no information. But I like to think, well, what can they do if you actually give them the information? And I like to think that in those cases, it gives people that sense of ownership over, their performance, their translation, the art which they do of a character. If they kind of understand, like, here is the backstory, and I don't mean like pages and pages of lore, just like these guys are like mad scientists, they're hyper breeders. I've kind of got them in mind as having like a sort of a chicken style look. These are the storylines they're involved with, because again, proximity, like with these guys are actually involved in a thing where one of your characters has cancer and they help cure it in exchange for something else. So just sort of flagging up like this is one of their storylines. So when you're kind of designing like sort of futuristic things, just keep that in the back of your mind, to avoid anything which might be awkward. And I just like to think that the more power you give people, the more they want to do a good job, and the better the final result is.
Yeah, I mean, I frankly, I think it shows in the games too, even like games that are top-down designed, and it's like, oh, well, we made this feature, we stuck to it. Now we have 2 years and we have to finish it, and we can't deviate from the line, and then you see, like, I think you're even talking about it earlier, how sometimes the most memorable things, we had a whole metaphor around Thanksgiving and how there's the turkey and the side dishes. And, some people, like for me, the side dishes are the memorable part. I don't care. Like, but if the turkey wasn't there, it would be weird at a Thanksgiving dinner, but the side dishes also have to be there. And that's what I'm going to remember. And so, for me, like a lot of like, say, Ur-Quan Masters, or a lot of games are just, wow, that one part is so memorable to me, and for a lot of reasons, but I also would bet nobody said at the beginning in a design doc, this little thing off in the corner is going to happen. Someone invented that along the way, and it's like, because it has such small scope, and giving room for those wiggle room and like a space where that can happen is cool. And then, it's interesting you bring up the theme, like as we've been talking, is involvement. And sorry if this sounds high-minded. I don't mean to sound high-minded, but like, I think like when you're talking earlier about the best story, and I my coy way of saying this has been, the story you write is never going to be as good as a story that the player experiences themselves. And that's the most important story. It doesn't mean do bad writing or something, right? And it just means that it's okay.
Oh no, I agree with that. My only issue with it is that I think often people take it too far, and they kind of get to a point of, well, that means we don't have to write a story. And that for me is like why a lot of sci-fi games especially end up being really boring. Because like, the example which I usually give is you have Elite, and everyone would agree that Elite is one of the greatest space games of all time. I would play Privateer any day of the week. Privateer is a far inferior game on every mechanical level to Elite, but I don't feel like Elite is a universe. And whereas I feel like the game where I can go into a bar and talk to the bartender and, fly around and like have these sort of story events going on, to me, that is an important part of the story.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times people will kind of get sort of caught up with like, you could tell your own story because you could go down onto a 1,000 procedurally generated planets and maybe you could even become a cartographer. And it's like, yes, but I'm not going to do that. Frontier First Encounters game, which launched without Sound Blaster support. Yes, I'm still better. I want the aliens there. I want the aliens. I want the cool planets. I want the interesting stuff. But what
you need enough to hold on to. You need something, but you need something meaty to grab into that you can hang your own ideas off of, and it has to be there. And then to kind of like sort of the theme that was coming up, here's the high-mindedness, which is like, oh, you're talking about how collaboration is the best thing. Is that true for the player too? Because I feel like the inverse of storytelling, when you're talking about like story being told through gameplay, I think the easiest version I would use to describe to someone too, and as you're talking about it, was remind me is like, I mean, I can use an example from Ur-Quan Masters, maybe I will, but it's the game noticed what you did. You're part of the story now. And it's so simple. It's such an easy thing. And there's so many, like, just from a production budget standpoint, there's so many cheap ways you can do it, right? And just like you're bringing up the fleet chat where they talk about like, oh, you picked up an inventory item, I'm going to remark on that. You see it in League of Legends where you like one character walks next to it, and what's the story of League of Legends? You're probably not even thinking about it when you're playing it, but one character goes here.
But you'll know who are enemies, who are like on the same team, who kind of get on with each other.
Yeah. And so you have to understand, well, you don't have to, but you get to understand this, and then you start to get invested. And like in Ur-Quan Masters, like selling slaves to the Druge, right? You can do that and like there's no consequence, but the fact that someone remarks on it later is like, whoa, the game noticed what I did. And even like, remembering I don't know if you ever read Tim Rogers' long spiel about Earthbound, but it was like an old piece. Long time ago, yes. And it was like some people have even like disproved and said he just made this up. And I don't know what the truth is. And in any case, it's a wonderful work of fiction. I don't care. It was very inspirational to me. And one of the things I remember him bringing up that I found very inspirational was it's not that the game just notices that what you did happened or it's aware of it. It's that the game didn't forget it. You may have forgotten it because you did it 10 hours ago. I mean, Earthbound's a long game. But like 10 hours ago, you did it, but then the game remembered, and the game reminds you of something you even forgot 10 years ago. And that actually like gives me chills, because that's when I think about, whoa, that's powerful game writing, because it's not just that, there's a joke and it keeps coming up. It's a recurring joke, right? You can see that in lots of linear media, but it's the inverse of that, which is I've even forgotten that this was a thing, and now you're making it a thing for me, and I can be kind of tricked into I think you were even saying like always surprise the player, or like give the player some surprises. And the surprise that connects with what I did is like, ooh, that's the best version possible. There's no other media that can do that. No linear media, because it's the same every time.
I mean, one of my favorite examples from Nighthawks, which is the game I'm making at the moment, is the storyline takes place over about 3 years or so of time, over like 5 or 6 acts. And partly it's like a rags to riches story, that you're basically you're a vampire in a world where vampires are now the secret is out, essentially. So about 10 years before the game starts, people discovered the vampires are real, and so you're now basically trying to make a life for yourself in a world where you can't just hide in the shadows anymore. That's the elevator pitch. It's like an inversion of Vampire the Masquerade and so on.
Yeah.
But it's not much rags to riches. So one of the first things which happens is that you are dragged in front of like the local vampire leader, this guy called Tancredi, and you choose how to greet him. So you've got the be respectful, be silent, tell him to go F himself. There's a couple of options like that. And over the course of the story, after the first act, basically you take over his nightclub, and then you're kind of in charge of it for the rest of the game. And then in Act 5, which is like sort of 3 years later, there's another character comes along who has basically done exactly what you did in Act 1 in terms of being like around, who basically uses exactly the same thing which you said to Tancredi in Act 1, but to you. And you have the exact same interaction, but from the other side of the desk. And again, it's very much an attempt, like mechanically trying to make the player sort of really kind of feel like, oh, I've made it.
I did
I've
something.
kind of come full circle, and dealing with this insolent, cocky little git, is hopefully a nice kind of fun moment.
Yeah. Oh, so Freddie, I realize you need to go.
I'm
happy to keep talking, but Fred.
Okay, yeah, please do. Don't leave on my account. Nice to have met you.
Nice to meet you as well, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are you good to keep going? I think we'd schedule this for
go
an hour
ahead.
or something, but like I'm having
no.
fun,
If you've got questions, I've got bad answers.
You have lots of excellent answers, and it's fun to just talk about it. And like, it's funny you mentioned before we're recording, for the people watching this recording later, we were talking about how like, it's a little isolating. And one of the things that like for me doing, well, one being 100% remote, but also going on a tiny team and just not having as many people around me with as many disciplines, and especially as many hands in their fingers or fingers in the like
fingers in pies.
Pies, yeah, exactly. Thank you. You finished my sentence. So yeah, people really like touching the things I'm touching and trying to work on it is sometimes I feel a little isolated, and even just having this conversation with you is really nice. So like, I'm just curious about like, as you've worked with different team sizes, or have you gone from like contractor to now you're doing your own thing and you have complete ownership? I've taken a similar trajectory of this project, but going down, it's my downward spiral, so I went from Activision owned studio, whatever, eventually, yes, I worked on a Call of Duty project. My name's not in the credits, but I did, and it's okay. It's my secret. So I worked on that, but I worked on some things before that, which I have better feelings about. And, I still, whatever, I enjoy whatever work I do. But now I'm used to being able, I used to be able to talk to 30 people about games on a regular basis. And now it's like, okay, I have Fred's working with me on this. We have a few other people who are involved with the project, but really design, I mean, I'm like the only person in the room, at a lot of times. And there's lots of ideas from people, and I encourage and I want those ideas and things like that. But it's been like a very steep learning curve for me, at least individually. And so like getting to talk with you, getting to watch anybody who wants to do a like a TED Talk style thing on YouTube, it's like, oh, these voices, oh, these people who say things to me, it's like, oh, finally just hearing their words, it really helps. And I won't I have a jokey story to tell, but I won't. But I just want to ask, like, for you, making your transition, like you've had change ups, right? I mean, you went into games, you had contract, now you're doing your own thing. Like, I'm not forcing you to make like a pithy statement or something, but like what's the learning ramp been like for you? Or has it just been like, I woke up one day, it's totally natural, I'm doing these things that I didn't have to do before? What has your experience been like?
I mean, for the most part, I think people kind of often underestimate the value of luck and just like random things. Like the reason I got into games writing, sorry, because I was a journalist for about 12, 13 years. I worked for magazines like PC Gamer and like other places like that. One of the main reasons I got into games writing is because somebody on Twitter posted a job thing for their company And I basically sort of just retweeted it saying, you know, you know, I don't have like the background for this, but this sounds really cool if you do. So, you know, just retweeting. And then basically I got a DM from them essentially saying, look, well, I know you don't really have the background, but I mean, I know your stuff. So if you want it to apply, then I would, I'm not promising it, but I would take your application. To which I basically kind of came back with, you know, well, I can't really do that because that would involve moving and all that kind of stuff. But if you're ever needing guest writers for your game, you know, wink, wink. And at which point they go, well, funny you should mention that. And so basically that's kind of how I got into writing on doing the games writing side. And then sort of slowly I moved away from the journalism stuff because I kind of sort of was done with that. I'd done it for long enough, and it's more fun making things than writing about things other people have made. And especially when, like, you know, a lot of your job involves being nasty to people about things they've made, which you don't really want to do, but you know, it's kind of part of the gig. And so I've been kind of fortunate that after like the first couple of things, you know, did okay, I sort of managed to kind of like get more work after that. But the reason that I'm currently working on my own thing is like probably the stupidest moment in my entire career. In terms of like the backstory, what it was a couple of, there's a gaming conference in the UK called Adventure X, which I'm a big fan of. I always love going to that. And a few years ago, basically, I was, you know, sitting in my hotel room after Adventure X and thinking, I want to make something. I want not anything big, nothing too fancy, but you know, I've done some freelance games writing. I'm going to download Unity. I'm going to see if I can make something unrelated. I'm now using Godot. I highly recommend Godot instead of Unity.
We're using it.
Well, like, yeah. And so basically, I was sort of thinking, well, what can I make as just like a project for me? And it's like, well, what have I done? And mostly what I'd done up to that point was text-driven interactive fiction type things, and you know, working with stuff like Sunless Sea and Fallen London. And think, well, okay, let's start with that as a starting point. And I was kind of playing around with, what do I do it about? And I was a big fan of the game Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines from the early 2000s. And so just as a fun personal project, like, okay, well, I've always thought it kind of interesting. What would Bloodlines be like if it was more like Fallen London? And so that was just really just a personal, let's learn how to program, because I know me, I work better with a project than I do trying to do tutorials. Like I'm much better like getting my fingers into something and figuring out problems as I like encounter them, rather than trying to learn the material and then like put it into practice. And so I spent about a couple of weeks, you know, putting together what was essentially a very primitive, you know, sort of Fallen London sort of style, you know, Vampire the Masquerade game. And I basically just tweeted a screenshot to Twitter as a joke, basically sort of saying something like, does anybody have White Wolf's contact information? Because I think they need to give me their license. At which point I then got a DM from the head of White Wolf saying, let's see what you've got. And at this point, what I had was basically a barely functional game which displayed text into a text box with some stolen art from other games. But what I figured was this is a really good opportunity to practice pitching. So I didn't think there was a chance in hell that they would go for it. But I thought it would be quite fun. And so I basically made a pitch and I submitted the pitch, and inevitably they said, okay, thanks. Yeah, not really what we're looking for. We're working with other people who actually know what they're doing. They didn't say that, but you know, fair is entirely fair. And it was after that I was kind of like, I quite like this idea. And so that kind of ends up leading to a Kickstarter, and then from that to an actual project, and hopefully we're now like approaching the light at the end of the tunnel on that one. But like I said, it entirely, like if you sort of like run back through the steps, that involved basically being cheeky to somebody about a job that I wasn't qualified for, leading to making my own games.
That's, I mean, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I know too many people with that, so with a story like that, myself included. And I mean,
that's how it happens far more often than people think. It's like, I mean, the guy I'm working with on Nighthawks, Dave Gilbert, who's Wacky Games. The reason that I know Dave is because about 14 years ago, I reviewed one of his games on my blog that about 10 people read. He saw that one, emailed me to say thank you for the review, and we got talking, and we became friends as a result of that. And so when we were kind of doing like, we'd often sort of talked about like we kind of fun to do something together at some point, but obviously the opportunity never really kind of arose. And so with this whole thing, it kind of became, well, I need to do a pitch, and there is no chance that they will say yes, but just on the off chance they say yes, I need to have my ducks in order. So would you be interested in working with me on this thing if it happened? And of course it didn't happen, but then, well, you were willing to work with me on that one. So how about this new thing?
No, I mean, but it's like there's luck and there's connections, and then there's, I mean, right place, right time, right? Which is like, hey, I think of people like these connections as like planetary orbits, right? We're not always in the same orbit, we're not always on the same star, but you have those, and then occasionally the orbits align, and like here we are, and it happened, and like the short version of
but it's why it's such a bad idea. Like, I mean, I'm not good at networking. I mean, I really do not. Well, I'm quite good at like pretending to be extroverted on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
In a social environment, I'm the guy who's like supporting the back wall. I hate networking. But the thing which I always sort of tell people is that there is basically no point trying to suck up to the big names at like the events you go to, because those people won't remember you exist, and they are the odds of them kind of like remembering and kind of calling you the next day and being like, hey, here's your make it moment. I'm not saying it never happens, but I will say it's very, very small amount of the time. Far more often, it'll be, somebody who knows you from Twitter, so that when you contact them about something else, they know who you are, or they've met you at a thing, or they vaguely are aware of something else which you wrote. And it's like the same thing. Like, a lot of people don't want to do small projects. They want to go straight to the big things. It's like, yeah, but the small things are what get you the big things. And
the connections to make the big things, and the chance to fail.
And the chance to fail. And the chance to fail is like the biggest thing, because if you I mean, let's say, for example, that 1,000,000 to 1 chance happens and somebody hires you to write the next Tomb Raider. If you do one character out of place, you are gone. There is no way that they're going to train you kind of on the go, or kind of like have. And again, I know I'm using Tomb Raider like as an example. There's nothing against Crystal Dynamics or whoever. But like kind of the big, like I just wanted to do a big AAA game, and it's like your control over it will be minimal. Your chances will be you'll be a tiny thread from the very start of it. You want the kind of projects where you can make mistakes, because everybody makes mistakes. And the more that you do, the more you realize is that nobody knows what they're doing. Some people are just very hard at pretending.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, there is a difference between, I don't know what I'm doing, but I have the background and the experience to pretend that I do, and literally a moron. And everybody pretty much is going to start as literally a moron. And that doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter who you are. I do not mean that's a bad thing. I'm completely moronic about so many things I haven't done before. And again, one of the biggest problems with doing journalism for about over a decade is you end up in this situation where there's a lot of people who entirely fairly are waiting for you to put your money where your mouth is. And I totally understand that. But you end up with it again, sort of saying that I'm not actually saying that. It's like, I was good at writing reviews and features because that is a discipline, and it does not automatically transfer to this. And I'm trying to say to a lot of people that playing a lot of games does not make you a designer, because anybody can come up with an amazingly brilliant idea. The trick is always going to be, well, which battles do you fight?
Yeah,
ideas
are cheap.
What can you actually make? What are the actual limits? And so one thing that I've always tried to do, and always would tell other people, is it's better to do something simple well than do something complicated badly. And it sounds obvious, but it happens so often, especially with indie games. It's like you can make a game which looks like, say, Undertale. Again, not a knock on Undertale. Undertale looks great, but you can make something which is relatively simple, but you're sure you can do, and people will embrace that. But if you try to make something, and well, I'm going to make something which is 3D and fancy with lifelike characters, you're immediately escalating your competition to Activision and Ubisoft and all of these other ones,
Yeah,
and you're going to look
hundreds of
crap.
people.
You're going
Yeah.
to look crap because you
Yeah.
cannot reach that level of fidelity, or at least you can't with anything which people are going to be impressed by. So yeah, okay, yeah, you can use metahumans to make a good-looking character, but you're going to make a good-looking character everybody looks at and kind of goes, well, that's a metahuman. In fact, quite often what you're going to end up making is a game which looks like all of those incredibly cheaply made porn games on Steam, which had exactly the same idea.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just drew something which was interesting and pixel based and kind of kept it low res, then that's your style, and you can own that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a very difficult thing. I think it's also a difficult thing to like talk to people about with the different levels of experience. And like just going back to one of the things you mentioned, which is everyone's a moron. I like your spin on it. I think what I like Fred's version, which I picked up from him, is under promise, over deliver.
Always.
That's
Yes.
one of the Toys for Bob mottos. But the other thing I'd say is like, well, imposter syndrome is real. I'm glad we have a name for it, and teaching people about it is important. Actively teaching and being aware of it, especially in team settings where it's like, hey, you need to understand that your job isn't to be right. And even like right now, I'm doing direction on this. And it's like, my job isn't to be right. My point is exactly what you said earlier, which is I just need to make a decision. And a decision that needs to be made is what happens. And I see with like a lot of projects, especially, look, I made lots of mods when I was a kid and I had tons of fun when I had no job and no life and whatever, and just sat there in front of a computer and did whatever I wanted. The right thing is always what gets it out the door, and not to just be like, cut it down, crass, I'm Mr. Project Manager and I'm going to destroy everything. It's not that, but for people to understand, hey, there's so many games that don't get shipped and of teams of all sizes. I mean, I've been unfortunate, or sorry, speaking of luck, I've been fortunate, not unfortunate. I've been fortunate to work on almost only games that have shipped. I've worked on one project that will never see the light of day. And, am I bummed about it? Yeah, a little, but, I'm working on something else now. And I didn't work that long on it and whatever. It's, it's a stepping stone. I learned stuff from it. But being able to say like, hey, what is the sum total of my experience? I've been working in games for a long time. I took a break. And yeah, I also have a similar like, wow, I shouldn't even be here. I just got into it by accident story about how I started in games. But I think, what is the sum total of my experience? It's, well, I don't know what's right, but I know what's wrong real fast. and I have to relearn what's right every time. And to kind of like quote Fred, he's not here now, is like, sure, there's a formula, kind of, but if there was a recipe for fun and we could just create fun every time, there would be way more games that are successful. There would be, I mean, I wouldn't have a job. If you could automate fun and fun creation, I mean, here we are on the brink of AI taking our jobs kind of conversations all the time, which makes me laugh. It is just like, there isn't a formula, and it's an art, because just like there's room for black and white photography, there's also room for paintings. And it's not like people are talking about how they're in one room. So what you're talking about too, about how, hey, do something small, allow yourself to make mistakes, is so important. And it's so hard to teach people for coming in from different backgrounds who maybe didn't get that opportunity in whatever field they're in too. Like, I'm lucky. I got to make a lot of mistakes. I still remember speaking of journalism, I have it pinned to the wall. I actually, it's stored away right now because I rearranged my apartment, but pinned to the wall was the first review of my first game I ever like worked on, where someone remarked on some of my content. And it was a like 4.7 out of 10 review from Game Informer for Madagascar. And it talked about how the game was like pretty fun in a lot of ways, but some of the level design was terrible, specifically the level I worked on. And I worked on a few levels for that game, but I remember like, even I go back and play it, I'm like, this is terrible, but I had it pinned to the wall. And I'm like, I was so proud, because it wasn't just like, hey, someone noticed me, that's cool. But it was, I made a mistake. And I want to remember that the beginning of all of this was like a pretty bad decision. And also maybe more inspiring to me, I have the ability to affect people's lives. I have the ability for a journalist to play a game, and ideally you'll notice the best parts of the game and not the worst parts, but journalist's job is to see what they see, and everybody's going to see it differently. But like, wow, by making something that terrible, someone noticed it. That's crazy. You could have written anything, and in they only had a small review block, right? In your pre-allotted paragraphs, you deigned to mention the horrible thing I did. Like, I have a lot of power here. I can make a lot of decisions. I can make things better. And it's just, I found it very inspiring. But the do it right, and even like, I mean, there was a joke I think on Twitter a few months ago that made me laugh, which someone pointed out to me because I have friends who know I'm working on this. And they're like, someone made the joke, which is, yes, every person dreams of going into AAA development where you can finally ascend to the highest level of game development where nobody cares about what you think and you never get noticed again. I'm like, luckily I have never worked on, I mean, except for my experience with Call of Duty, where actually I do read reviews and like, oh, someone noticed something I did. I mean, my name's on the credits and I don't really care, but it's like, cool, that's neat. I still get to have a little bit of that, but luckily I never ascended to the like, oh, I'm part of the machine. I got in, you know, Toys for Bob was 16 people when I joined, and I, you know, just through natural evolution, I kind of had some I wouldn't call it authority, but I had a lot of agency there, and I got to do a lot of fun things. But we tried. I think the studio did a pretty good job of trying to give people agency. But yeah, the idea of like, you can make mistakes, and also when I'm like bringing people in, I want you to make mistakes. And you know, this is maybe an aside, but when I would hire, I was like a hiring manager at Toys for Bob. When I would bring in new people, we could be heads down on the super important project, and we're bringing in a new engineer or whatever. Engineer designer was sort of my team, and I would ask them, it's like, you know, Activision, of course, well, when's the game going to be done? You need to hire more people so you can get the game done. That's their insight, right? I bring someone in and I go, no, new engineer, new hire. My way of training them, this is true, was you don't work on the project for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, you're going to make your own game. And it has nothing to do with what we're doing. And it was fun for a few reasons. One, they got to learn their tool set. There was low stakes. They were allowed to make mistakes. It's like a game jam. Every time someone was hired, they had a little game jam. But for me, the biggest value wasn't just like, yes, you get to learn, but it's you get to learn in a safe environment with no pressure. And yeah, I'm there helping. I'm your manager. You know, I'll sit with you, have questions about it, whatever. But let's just spend 2 weeks. You make your own game. And we got some like crazy games out of people, by the way, doing that. You know, someone made a GRPG, someone made like an action platformer. There were all sorts of stuff, no matter what we were working on. And it's really hard to train failure. And encourage that. And maybe when you're a contractor, you don't even get the opportunity. But you know, I've been, speaking of good fortune, like I'm working with well, I think I can say this publicly. I don't think he'll mind, but Ben Chandler, who's doing some art for us, and he's, pardon?
He's the artist on Nighthawks.
He's, oh my gosh, wait, did he mention that to me? Okay, that's so funny. Anyway, well, great. All right. Oh, we're like one big happy family. This is so cool. But anyway,
Ben, I'm just going to say is a disgusting human being,
terrible.
because you look at his amazing artwork and you go, okay, well, at least, you know, I still have like writing on my side. Oh no, he's a great writer as well. Okay, well, I could design it. No, he's a designer. He's made plenty of. Okay, okay. Well, I don't do music, but I'll like. Oh, of course, he bloody does music.
He does music.
No. He's no. Ben is genuinely amazing. Yeah, he is a phenomenal talent. I'm so, you know, I'm so glad to have had him as the artist on Nighthawks. I mean, the amount of stuff which he's produced for this game is insane.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, so I then, well, while we're talking about how horrible it is, I'll just tell you my I don't know if you'll ever watch this video, but my biggest complaint with Ben, and he gets to hear this all the time, is why can't I have more of your time? I want you to work for me all the time. And he's like, I have other projects he wants.
I mean, that's kind of why Dave got such an amazing deal when he signed him on as an artist. Ben is genuinely incredible, and I am so excited to hear that he's doing stuff for you as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm excited too. Again, he is disgusting because I can't have more of his time. But where I was going with that too, that I like really appreciate, apart from the fact that he's very talented, is, you know, and again, I don't think he'll mind me saying this, but it's a lot of what I need from someone isn't a finished product. And he understands that really well. And he's really good at an unfinished product. And I remember the first time I started working with Ben, before I said, hey, here's what we need to do. Here's some work, do this work, right? Or whatever. Here's the box we need to start painting in. Before we did that, you know, one of the things I really admire about him and helped us get on the same page is he said, well, you know, the only way this is going to work is if we can communicate about what it is exactly the vision is and what it is you want from me and what it is I'm going to need from you.
Yeah.
And the most successful, useful thing, you know, for us talking was the first time we got together and talked, we actually just talked. And like, as you brought up earlier, like, you don't know who you're going to work with. It's like, actually, in this case, knowing who you are, you know, like, yes, of course I've seen his work. Of course, like, I wouldn't be calling him for if I hadn't seen what he'd done and liked it. Right.
Well,
But
I mean,
can we get on the same page? And can we know what failure looks like? And do we want failure? And that's a lot of the initial work I got from him. Like, a lot of the work he did, probably keeping 30% of it, but that's what we wanted. We wanted that sort of like, go everywhere, go everywhere, go everywhere. And it's so helpful to have someone who can like, has the experience of knowing how to fail.
And again, we were talking earlier on about, you know, people being involved with games and sort of spotting things. Like a good example on Nighthawks, which Ben was wanting to point out that even though we were trying to have a fairly diverse cast, he just sort of flagged up that, you know, I know we said we were going to do a fairly diverse cast, but we've got a lot of white guys. You know, or you know, white, you know, we haven't really kind of sort of gone as far as we said we were going to go. And so it's like, you're right. Let's try and fix that. And, you know, or just, you know, again, you know, doing a quick scribble version of something, and it's like, I'm not going to spend the time like doing the hair so it's all perfect or whatever, but is this kind of the rough idea? And the thing is with Ben that if you ask him for something which is difficult, he's a magician. Like we've got there's a section in Nighthawks involving a painting called La Maladetta. And essentially, what I asked Ben to do was to paint me 2 paintings which could conceivably be credited to an old master who used to hang around Versailles in like the sort of the 17th, you know, 18th century. And he had them within a day. And it was just, this is... I got nothing. I mean, literally, you drew this faster than I wrote you the brief.
Totally, yeah.
No,
I mean,
he is amazing. He has amazing talent. So lucky to have him.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah, and again, it's sort of like this is just—it's a quote at this point where, you know, he'll give me something, and I talk about it in detail. We'll spend more time talking about it than he did doing it, because he's like, "Oh, that was just like 10 minutes of work." I was like, "What?" This was 10 minutes, but he, you know, he was able to solve for so many parts of the equation, which I really appreciate.
But I mean, so much. I mean, it is that like initial chat which, you know, gets you where you need to be. So again, with Long Journey Home, obviously we had a couple of touchstones, but we had a couple of other ones which again were just really good to kind of make sure we're on the same page. The other big one was Farscape. Because we were both huge fans of Farscape, and not just like in the sense of like this is a really good show, but in terms of, well, what do we both like about Farscape? And like a big thing was that the aliens are actually alien. You know, we loved the puppetry. You know, we loved the fact it wasn't just people with a Cornish pasty kind of sort of stuck to their forehead. You know, but also it was like the depths of the world design and like the specific. You could really like zero in kind of beyond like, I like a thing, I want to do the thing. It's like, yeah, but what about it?
Deconstruct it a little. Yes.
What about it do you like, and what do you think you can do better or different or bigger or wider? And it's one of my biggest frustrations is when I see people and again, I don't mean the individual like people on the team. I'm fully aware of why this happens. But when like a licensed game is just basically a recreation of a thing which you've already seen or read or whatever, to me that is completely pointless. And then people will start sort of saying that if you make changes, you're being disrespectful to it. And it's like, no, the ultimate respect is to make it better, you know, for having it in your hands.
Yeah.
And you know, that is to find the stuff which it hasn't had a chance to do before. And often in the case of games, there are things which games can do which nothing else can. The one example which I always go back to, I don't believe anybody's ever done it outside of a tech demo. If they have, I deeply apologize, I must have missed it. Doctor Who, the TARDIS effect. Why has nobody done the TARDIS effect? As in,
like the scale changing.
Like we've been able to do this effect since Unreal in like 1998. You know, the thing where you can walk around it and walk inside it in a like a seamless thing. I I can do that with Unity. I could, I could do that with Godot. It's not that difficult, but nobody's done it. And to me, like, that is, again, that's like, if you're making like a Doctor Who game, to me, that is like one of the defining things, because that experience of it being bigger on the inside is something you cannot get in any other medium. And nobody's done it. And to me, that is one of the great, like, missed opportunities. Unless I've missed somebody doing it, in which case I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, well, are there even any Doctor Who games?
Oh, loads. But
okay, I haven't played any. I apologize.
No, there's I mean, in recent years, Revolution did. Was it Revolution? Was it Sumo? I know it was the same kind. Anyway, there was the adventure games which were like freely distributable. There's been a VR thing. There's been some Wii ones. But even the VR one, I believe, doesn't let you actually walk into the TARDIS in the sense of like seeing that effect. It's sort of like you got like a painted on door, or I think the VR one it like does a forced perspective thing, so you feel like you're walking in, but you can't actually walk around it and really kind of get that that
sense
that
of space.
And to me, if I'm making a Doctor Who game, that for me is like day one. It's like we do the TARDIS.
That's so interesting.
The storyline, because the storyline, it could be anything. The TV show could do any story you can do in a game. But that effect is something only games can do.
Yeah, well, this is like maybe a bit of a tangent. It's funny because I think about that kind of abstraction, and it's like, I don't know, Super Nintendo games were doing that. You would see a little house icon on the overworld map of Final Fantasy VI or whatever, and then you go in and, oh my gosh, it's a giant castle. Like, playing with abstract sizes is something games just do very naturally as part of the language and part of the technological limitations, frankly, in a lot of cases. So it is weird. I guess I think the first thing that just jumps to mind is like Superliminal. I don't know if you played that game. And they're actually like playing with space. Like, people have done that. It's just nobody's ever put Doctor Who in that together, I guess. I don't know.
And for me, that is the kind of fusion of story and mechanics that really excites me. I mean, not that example actually specifically, but it's the thing where you've got the cool technical thing, but you're using it for an experience which will be memorable and exciting and people haven't had before. Even though you can step back and say, well, yeah, but Portal exists. Yes, it does.
Yes.
But Portal doesn't let you walk into the TARDIS. But the Unreal Engine did that, and people have made like demos of it. Yes, I know, but they haven't done it in a full game where you actually get to be the Doctor or a companion or whatever, having that experience. And I think a lot of the time, I think game developers can get kind of caught up in, has the trick been done before? I was thinking sort of Magic, where in Magic you kind of have like a relatively small handful of tricks, but what makes them interesting is the different spin that each magician gives on them. Even if technically, like you're making something disappear, well, you're probably tucking it behind your hand or whatever. But what's the story of that? What's the plotting? What's the audience member's role in that? What's the joke which you spin that into? And
90% theatrics.
I think Magic and theatrics have a lot more to do with game design than people give them credit for. Like, so much of it is a trick, and it's you're misdirecting, you're setting something up without the player realizing it, so that when your thing happens, that thing has a weight to it which it wouldn't have if you didn't have like the sort of the setup. And that can be something as simple as like here's a really good example actually, which is Tales of Monkey Island was a Telltale game from many years ago, and there's one episode which introduces a character called Morgan Le Fay, and she's basically introduced as a pirate hunter who is hunting mighty pirate guy Bruce Threepwood, but is also a huge fan of him. And in the next episode, you pick up when they've been at sea together for a while, and she's realized he's actually a bit of an idiot. And so like the initial thing like is not as forthright. But the cool thing is that between those two chapters, there was an episodic game gap of like at least a month. And I don't remember exactly how long it was, like a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. But the point is that when you see them again, it's from the perspective of somebody who you have known for 3 months or 1 month or 2 months or however. And so it feels like that relationship is earned in a way that it wouldn't if you just did like 2 weeks at sea later and then kind of cut to the next scene. And to me, that is a magic trick. And it's the kind of magic trick which, again, might have been intentional. It might not have been intentional. I genuinely don't know if it was planned, but the overall effect was absolutely that. You know?
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, yes, we are magicians, and I think I'm not going to be the first person to say games are smoke and mirrors. You know, polygons. I mean, I just describing to my girlfriend what a polygon is and why, you know, she's playing a game like, why is the face, you know, why did they have to render it this way? And we're like, well, they had a budget. Like, what's a polygon? You know, and she's an engineer. She understands. And so, but like, what a player experiences in a game. I mean, yeah, look, you and I are like, clearly we've both played some old games, and so I can go back and play an old game and have really insane feelings about it, even if it's just a text adventure. I mean, I grew up on MUDs, so it's like I had no graphics. I was just like text adventure. That's what I live for.
Infocom and Level 9 and all of that kind of stuff here.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, that was my life. I mean, technically, my first game design was in a MUD and like just writing walls of text. And how do you interact with something? You type a word out, and that's how it works. But you know, it's more smoke and mirrors than people realize, and that is, you know, it's a little bit like the camera. You know, well, I like dance a lot, and so it's a lot like the camera in film, which is, well, you can choose what a viewer sees. There's a lot of stuff outside of the frame of that they're seeing, but you don't have to worry about that, and that is the coolest magic trick in the world. And so, like, trying to encourage other people who want to get into game development to understand, use your tools, use the assets that you have, which is, you don't have to explain this. There is no requirement. I mean, there's even just narrative. Like if you're writing a book or a story or something, you don't have to explain anything outside of the scope of your story. You can imply it exists and whatever. There's just, even in any creative medium, it's there. But like, the strong suit, or one of the strong suits of games is, especially from a production mindset, is cheap magic tricks. There are so many cheap magic tricks that don't require a lot, but you have to understand the magic isn't because, oh, I spent hours on a painting, I spent hours doing this writing, I spent hours doing this design. It's no, it's the sum of these parts. And then the player is going to have this, I think of it as choreography, this like somewhat choreographed experience, or this part in a play where it's like, you know, if you're acting on stage and there's actors moving around you, sure, you may know what you're supposed to do and how the blocking is supposed to be. But if some actors start going in front and some actors going by, you're just naturally going to like, oh, I guess I should go here. I thought I should go there, but now I'm here now. So letting the player participate in a like live impromptu like play that's happening around them is one of the best magic tricks we can do. And like you said, sometimes it's an accident, sometimes you intend for it to happen, sometimes you're going to be surprised, but that's the strength. And you don't know what's going to happen.
And I think one of the cool things about games is there are so often you'll have a game which will do something which people haven't really done since. You know, like one of the games which I particularly love for Smoke and Mirrors is The Last Express, which is kind of fascinating to hear people talk about because they get it wrong. You know, a lot of the time when they're talking about the game, they actually don't understand how it works because it does so much behind the scenes, just juking things around and kind of playing with things. And so you'll get people sort of say things like, you know, I was really worried that, you know, I was going to miss events in this real-time adventure, whatever. And said, yeah, because if you played a couple of times, and I don't mean this again, I don't mean this is a negative thing. I mean, you have to play it quite a lot to sort of see it, and you then start looking at how it actively avoids that happening, like with how it triggers its scenes, like how. Like if you don't do a thing, it has a backup so that character will then come and find you, or something kind of similar. Or like a good example, which I always loved, is World of Warcraft. That if you have the capital city, Stormwind, it has a population of about, I don't know, 100, 200. It's not big, but that doesn't matter because you're seeing it in comparison to the small, tiny little village that you sort of, so it feels big. And you know, and I think there are so many games where you kind of go back into the archives of just looking at, you know, the tricks that they use to kind of like stretch it. Well, actually, I'll give you one more example because it was on my mind. I was talking to someone about Netflix's like choose your adventure games, and you know, they were sort of saying basically, well, what else can you do? I mean, it's that very simple thing. And I always point to a cinemaware game called King of Chicago. And King of Chicago basically is, it uses a similar kind of interface, but rather than being a linear like series of like you do A, therefore B, therefore C, whatever. Because it's keeping track of numbers behind the scenes, you're actually steering the story in a much more free-form kind of way.
It's not as
Because like
obvious,
you do a thing and you lose respect, and therefore if you have under this amount of respect, then it will spiral off in this direction. And you know, like gaming history is full of these, and so often they're only done once. And they're just there to be picked from, you know. And people will go on for hours about, like, say, Ultima 7, like letting you know, bake bread or something like that. But then, yeah, but here's a much cooler thing in Ultima 7, which is that all of the old stuff in the game, all of the, like, the traditional things, uses the runic alphabet, whereas all of the new religious stuff, which has been added, like, because it's sort of done by the end of the bad guys of the game, is written in English as a mechanical separator between the old and the new. Is that these guys use runes, these guys use letters. That is never mentioned because people only ever talk about the bread. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I think some of what you were talking about earlier, where it's the difference between playing something and appreciating it on the surface and say it did this versus being able to deconstruct it and say, here's the component parts. And so the example, like, I've been kicking around lately, is the game. Well, I have a legit question for you about the Ur-Quan Masters, or what we're talking about. And okay, time for an Ur-Quan Masters sequel. Let's have a conversation. But this is not a joke. I mean it. The game the most like the Ur-Quan Masters I've played in the past few years, since, you know, just the past few years. I'm going to give myself some slack because maybe there's something else if I go further back, is Spiritfarer. I don't know if you've played Spiritfarer.
I haven't played it. I'm aware of it, but I haven't played it.
But, you know, so the conceit of Spiritfarer is you are on a boat. You're basically taking over for Sharon, whatever. The person who takes
Karen,
people, or
the ferryman of the river Styx and or Lethe.
Yes. So you're the ferryman, and now you've inherited his boat. He's done. He's like, I'm out. You got to send people to the afterlife now. And you sail your boat around, and you get stories from people or different characters, and you explore the universe, and you send them to the afterlife. Now, if I were to say that to like a Ur-Quan Masters super fan, and look, very fortunate we have some who are like, love Ur-Quan Masters, oh, space adventure, aliens, and whatever, they would say, huh? What? There's no science fiction at all. This is like a mythology, interpersonal relationship game.
Can I say, if they do say that,
yeah,
if they do say that, I really hope your immediate response is Ulysses 31, bitch.
Wait, what? Say that again.
Ulysses 31.
Wait, Ulysses
it's
31.
a cartoon. It's a cartoon from the 80s. It's,
no, I'm not familiar. I mean, I know Ulysses.
It's the Odyssey recreated as a sci-fi epic.
Oh my gosh!
I'm
writing this
with
down.
with an incredibly memorable theme tune.
Okay, I'm actually gonna write this down because, like, this sounds like my alley. Fun fact: in high school, I had a group project with my friend, and we had to do a film. We were in like a computer film thing, and we had to do something, turn an assignment after reading the Odyssey. Right? We did a Mystery Science Theater watches the film of the Odyssey, and we had puppets who were making jokes about the Odyssey, and that was our film project. I distinctly remember this.
I actually want to see that now.
I don't know if it exists. The only thing from my high school days that does exist, thanks to my friend who saved it on a CD-ROM. I think she moved to Australia or something, and she shipped me this CD-ROM. She said, Dan, I found your school project. My friend and I, again, I hope I release this at some point with a lot of apologies, because I do have the file now, I think it was called, like, I don't know if it was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but it was something like that. And all I remember is my friend and I used this. We had a computer assignment, and we made these crazy 2D animations with the weirdest sounds ever. And somehow the beginning was filmed in me, and I don't even know how I had access to a camera. Maybe we borrowed the school camera. This was very early on. So, like, think low tech, late 90s. The beginning starts with me going, there's a voice speaking to me. And then I look down in the toilet, and then there's a head in the toilet, which we pasted, and it's my friend's head saying, like, Dan, you have to follow me. And I go into the toilet, and then it goes into a cartoon world. I don't know. That was the weirdest tangent I've ever gone on. So, I mean, that's saying a lot, but okay. So we should wrap up here. This is really fun, but I also, like, I do need to get to do, I have some other work to do today, believe it or not. And maybe you do too.
Entirely fair.
But I think we do, but, you know, we have fun. And so what are we going to do? So to your, like, your kind of description of like paying homage to something, and also, you know, just the real quick example of something someone hasn't done in a while is just melee combat in Ur-Quan Masters. Like, that's pretty unique and strange. I actually think it's hard to pick up because it's kind of unusual. It has weird physics. There's sort of like, yeah, there's lots of top-down space games, you know, and I played Sunless Skies, right? But nothing quite like melee. And there's a lot of design in there that's interesting. And so like
ships feel like interpretations of their aliens.
Yeah,
you know, like and obviously, this isn't exactly a you know, my God, I hadn't thought about it. Everybody knows this, but like the spacey, like shooting from behind them, and you know, all that kind of stuff. But I think that's one of the things which the other like attempts to sort of do it have never really gotten, that because you have to have the interesting aliens before anybody's going to care about flying their ships. And I love the way that some of the ships in Ur-Quan Masters are rubbish, and that's fine, because you have to have the bad ships so the good ships can feel feel better.
Or it matches the character, right? Which is like, this character is ridiculous, and so let's give them a ridiculous ship. And you know, there's even like, if you go look at the Ur-Quan Masters interface, there's, call it the captain's window, where you actually see them like piloting the ship. And in some cases, I mean, there's a real reason for that too, because there's races that you play as in Super Melee, if you want, in Ur-Quan Masters, that don't exist in the game. The only time you ever get to really relate to certain characters are just through that tiny little window and their ship. And so their ship actually, there's no alien painting, there's no conversation, you never get to talk to them. So their ship becomes that character. So that's just an example of like, everything that's old can be new again because no one's been doing it. But here's an interesting real question for you, which is, you know, this isn't a trick question, I swear, but like, we're working on a sequel to the Ur-Quan Masters, and it's been 30 years. People have had a lot of time to think about what they could do with it, you know, ourselves included. I didn't work on Ur-Quan Masters, the original, but you know, I am working with Fred, who did. He's not here right now, but trust me, he was here. So everybody's had a lot of time to think about it. And one huge aspect of the conversation is, what is a sequel to Ur-Quan Masters? I mean, that's the biggest open-ended question in the world. But to your point of, take something that it wanted to do and it couldn't, or take something, what's in the universe, what's known, and then how do we stretch outside of its boundaries? Because if we, you know, a remark someone made, I've made this joke to a few people, but a remark someone made on our Reddit recently was, why don't you just use the old engine? And that made me laugh. And I don't want to pick on that person. It was just so like 90 degrees from where my head is, which is like, yeah, why don't we? I think that was Fred's response, actually. Like, is that what makes it a sequel? Is that what's going to make it a sequel? So I'll just ask you very honestly, and this is open-ended question, which is, Ur-Quan Masters originally came out, you know, over 30 years ago. You've had time to think about it. A lot of people have gone on to make games and, you know, said like, I loved this game. It made me want to do something, right? And we've talked about like The Long Journey Home, and other people have had their own ideas of what the Ur-Quan Masters was, or what it meant to them. Like, here comes the Ur-Quan Masters 2. What does that game need to do for you, like for you personally, or what do you, or for the audience, or for people to play it, and maybe someone who never even played the original? But I want your answer. Like,
I mean, that is one of those which is sort of somewhere between difficult to come up with on the fly, and I'll send you my consulting price sheet. I would say that for me, the thing is less what it should be as what it shouldn't be, which is that I wouldn't just want it to be like, how do we rehash the setting of Ur-Quan Masters 2? Of Ur-Quan Masters. And also, I don't want to see a precursor race treasure hunt, because I'm sick of that. So for me, it would be probably more something like an Odyssey sort of style inspired game of, you know, getting from A to B, or sort of something along those sorts of lines. But for my thing would be more, how do I make this a deeper role-playing experience? And so for me, a lot of it would be like okay, we've got the ships thing, but it's like I want these guys as crew. You know, I want to actually kind of have like fighting between like the different factions, or whatever. So I would probably do it like as a lame premise, which I wouldn't necessarily sort of give, would be something like an Andromeda like sort of like creating the Union of Free Stars or something like that, of
Yeah.
basically trying to bring everyone together into a defensive thing to take on the Ur-Quan, since obviously they're in the title, so they kind of have to be like a fairly big thing. But it would basically be that the sort of elements of like, we're all divided, you know, but equally we all are going to rub against each other, and so trying to kind of be the mediator, the peacemaker, the example that proves that everyone can work together, with the twist that they wouldn't be able to, and so you would inevitably be making enemies who you would end up fighting against. You know, rather than like actually being able to kind of get everyone on side, you would have to basically sort of choose, like, if you're going to be ruthless, then you can get X, Y, and Z, but you won't get A, B, and C, and that kind of. But for the most part, like having that sort of sense of I like building something. I like the sense of like making something bigger than its parts. I think there is something very like self-affirming about, you know, about repairing and kind of bringing things together, and just generally this sort of sense that by the end of the game, you know, I have made this. I have made my federation, and now we're going to put it to the test, because the bad like you sort of spend the entire game like saying, you know, the bad guys are coming in 10 solar years or whatever, and they are going to arrive whatever you do. But like the time limit in the original game, you only have so long before the Crusaders kind of sort of finish. Actually tell people that this time. You know, just just so that it doesn't come as a huge surprise. But basically, it would be like, you will not be able to do a perfect thing. You do not have the time. You do not have the resources. What is the best you can do under these situations in a fractured universe? And it would be basically like pulling together like the defenses to take on like the invading, kind of something along those sort of lines. Obviously, that is a off the top of my head, not super imaginative, but that is like kind of how I would think about it.
No, that's cool. I mean, it's sometimes the best ideas start with things that aren't even that imaginative, and then you spin them, you know. And the thing you said that I really like that answer, just by the way, from one creator to another. Like, I think it's a great start of an answer. But you also said it's less about what you're not gonna do, or it's more about what you're not gonna do.
Yes.
And you know, that's something that like I've put together, you know, a few documents about it. I've talked to people about like what dissolve the Ur-Quan Masters. Going back to my Spirit, for example, like why does that game remind me of the Ur-Quan Masters? It has nothing to do with space. It has nothing to do. I mean, you're sort of the captain of a boat, kind of, but you know, there's a lot of component elements. And one of the things, like when I play a lot of space games, there's often like, and I'm not picking on anyone, but I'll just say, oh, Gears of War. Let's use Gears of War. Is it a space game? Yeah, kind of, sort of,
It's in
whatever.
space.
You could argue it's in space, but there's these science fiction universes, but my ability to participate in them is as grunt, as part of the corporation, you know. And it's like, I don't want to be the grunt. And so a big part of exactly. And so like the word that I like to kick around a lot is be the captain. What's the fantasy of being the captain? And it's a little bit like original Star Trek, which is, yeah, there's a federation, but you're on a science mission, and you need to explore, and you need to solve problems, and it's up to you.
And you are the authority within your little universe.
Yep. And you have responsibility too. It's like, it's not just like I'm the boss, I can do whatever I want. I mean, yes, you can go say it's the Empire of Zelnick or whatever if you feel like it, but it's like, that's part of the role-playing element. It's really like you have the authority, but you also start feeling the responsibility, because you realize, oh, it's in my fingers. You know, I can do it. There isn't, you know, the corporation back home isn't going to help me. They're not going to fix the problem. I have to fix the problem. And I have to make, even like you're using your example, you know, high level view is like, I have to make decisions about what the solution is. And that's the
other high level thing for me is that I think one of the issues with Ur-Quan Masters is that it is not entirely, obviously, but like a lot of RPGs, which kind of people remember as being these sort of big freeform experiences, it's kind of not. Ultima 7 is exactly the same. It's like people remember the open world. Like, you can go wherever you want, but you're meant to do this.
Yeah,
and
the critical path is much narrower.
It's very much the same. Like you meet the Spacey, you go off, you meet these guys, you do these things, and you can fail at some of them. You can skip some of them. You've got the time, but ultimately, you can follow a walkthrough and you can finish Ur-Quan Masters pretty easily.
Pretty fast.
I would want to have much more of a, not strategy in the sense of something like, say, Galactic Civilization, Sins of a Solar Empire, but it's like more narrative strategy, in terms of, I have to make decisions which matter. And again, this sort of sense of that I could then come back to it with I'm going to try, but okay, this time I'm going to play it, but we're not going to make any allies. We're only, it's just going to be Earth against the universe, or, I'm going to make everybody my friend, and I'm going to find like loopholes and weird things, and for me, like that kind of thing is the feel of Ur-Quan Masters, which people don't know they want, because in their head that's what it already was. And I think unless you've replayed the open source version, you don't remember just how linear much of it is.
If you didn't cross a certain gate, you would never be able to finish. And there are those certain
if you
gates,
didn't do a thing, you get the Silandro would just be attacking you all the time. As I like a sort of straight up, no, follow the plot, follow the plot, follow the plot.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. We should wrap up. But I think I'll say like one thing just to like kind of wrap up this little part, and then we'll say our goodbyes is I was talking to someone else about this, and it's taking on more gravity in my head lately. And I don't think this is a spoiler. But nobody's gonna see this video by the time for a little while, so I think we're safe. But here it's a little bit of a spoiler.
Nobody's watching 2 hours of this. It's fine.
Or nobody believes me on anything anyway. Everything I say is a lie. There we go. Okay, but here's one thing that I feel about the Ur-Quan Masters when I analyze it just with a purely critical lens, which is the opening of that game is amazing. I love the opening of the Ur-Quan Masters. The stakes that it sets up with not just text, but also with pictures like Earth is under a red shield. It's just the state of the universe, and the problem is so immediately clear. It's obvious. I care really fast because it's Earth. I live there. I'm a human. It's like there's this there's this stake setting that I think is really successful. And one of the things the team was, I mean, I speak in hyperbole all the time, so that's hyperbole too. But like scratching our heads over is, how are we going to make it that good? And one of the things that like I feel strongly about, things are amorphous as always with a game, and it's never done until it's done. But it's much easier rather than try to do, thinking of nostalgia and try to do what it was before and what's the sequel, whatever, rather than try to do what it did as well as it did, acknowledge, you know what, if we try to do exactly what that was and do it again, there's a chance we could miss the mark. Maybe let's find a different direction and do a really good version of that. I'm not saying let's change the entire game, but the stake setting and the storytelling beginning aspect of who am I and why do I care and why am I here and what's going on in the universe.
Well, I think especially in terms of the fact that with Ur-Quan Masters, if people want to play the Ur-Quan Masters, there's a game called the Ur-Quan Masters they can just download. And it will be a different situation if it was like some incredibly obscure game where the idea hasn't been seen since. But no, I think it's the same thing. A lot of people forget with retro games that, and this tends to be the case, especially for adventures, in my experience, that people see the adventure game genre as being inherently retro. And I always, my thing is that I put, no, until Doom came along, adventures were the thing which were breaking the rules all the time. They were the first games to show off CD, AdLib, Sound Blaster, Talkies, FMV. They were technological, showpieces for what your computer could do. And all of the games that people remember, like say Monkey Island, this is example which I always give people, that if you want to make the next Monkey Island, you have to make a game which does what the original Monkey Island did, which is break all of the rules to the extent that nobody remembers them being rules in the first place. And so
it's a high bar, but yeah.
But I know what it is. But you shall say to people, well, okay, I don't like real-time puzzles. So, well, except for Monkey Island. Oh yeah, but that did it well. And I'm kind of bored of 3 trials. Yeah, but Monkey Island was the first to do them. And every BioWare game for the past 20 years has been an exact copy of Monkey Island 2's 4 map pieces, thing.
Yeah.
And just sort of that's the thing, like in their day, these were the blockbusters. These were the big dramatic games. These were the AAA, experiences that nobody had had before. And the fact that you look at them now as like kind of, after their lessons have kind of been, passed through osmosis into
Understood,
their
yes.
own and other genres, it still doesn't mean that you can just redo them and expect anybody to care. And the reason the Ur-Quan Masters starts off so well is because it's not anything specific about what it's doing. It's about the way it establishes the stakes, your role, and the style of the game in about 5 minutes.
Yep.
And that is what people want. Maybe they don't want the part where you blow up your lander on the first planet, but it's that thing like you have that fantasy. You have the comedy with the spacey. You have the threat with the Ur-Quan. You have the sense that even though it's a big universe, there's a justification for you being small. But also you have the big F off ship, which is you immediately sort of feel this is the deciding moment in this. This is what makes me special. It just does. It wraps all this sort of stuff up in a really great way for that story. But if it was a different story, then it wouldn't work. It would just be it would just be like, here's our wacky alien, and here's our
Or if there was no story, that game.
Oh God, yeah.
Why would you keep playing? And
Yeah.
we talked about that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's very cogent. And when we talk, to our community and the team about what it is, there's a lot more rules about what not to do than what we should do. So there's a big wide open ocean.
There's
but
always,
the point...
there's always that small group. There's always that group which tends to be the loudest of any kind of like classic project, which is just do exactly what you did before.
Don't change.
And great. That will sell you 10 copies. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And we have, it's really cool to have an audience. It's really cool to bring in community members to help work on the project, and building a lineup about that has been like a big learning experience, and it's been a lot of fun. And even what you said about like, I mean, gosh, do we even call it adventure games? We just called them games when I was playing them. And, there were CD-ROM games, and I was like, ooh, so fancy. Ooh, wow. I'm moving up.
Adventure games and the dark era of interactive movies.
Wait, is this like E.T.? Never mind. But just what you said about like the point is to break new ground and to be a good game, and that's something that like even in our internal discussions, I talk to people. I say like, if the game isn't fun, no one will care, and we have to do what's fun and what's good, and what works now is different because everything's a product of its time. And you could, like you said, you can go play the Ur-Quan Masters. It's still there. And I'm not saying we're discarding and being
the stuff which you did well will have been borrowed by other games, because that's how it works. And so like you do the same thing now, and you just feel retro. And it's you have to kind of do basically what Ron Gilbert did with a lot of the New Monkey Island. It's not the most advanced adventure game, but it is Ron Gilbert and the rest of the team, of course, sitting down and rethinking and kind of go, well, how would we make it now?
Exactly.
And knowing what we know now from our own games, but also Mass Effect and X Beyond the Frontier and Galciv and all of these other great space games.
Yeah, totally. It is like really interesting, and even genreification. Fred used to say we're making a retro game, and sometimes I would like be a little shy about that word because it sounds like dismissive or whatever. It like lets you off the hook. And I'm like, well, I don't know. With Steam and the marketplace, yes, there are people who can like go play retro games. Pixel art has taken on it's its own life form. It's its own art form, just like like print photography, right? Okay, sure. If you can be into print photography. You don't have to. Most people are using digital cameras or whatever. So there's all these things. There's room for everything. And the gaming, like the number of games that are being produced is crazy. I can't keep up anymore, right? I don't have time. So it's really interesting, just what you said, like communicating with the team and saying, hey, what did we learn? What are our inspirations right now? Because, tell you what was inspiring them when they were working on Ur-Quan Masters, and if Fred were here, he would be like, hopefully nodding along with me. I don't think I'm misrepresenting him. Their inspirations were something of their time.
How dare you?
Oh, we're all so perfect and we're not morons ever. But no, their inspirations were whatever products of their time, and the game is the product of that time. And but the point is, allow yourself to learn and be inspired. And one thing that comes up a lot with Ur-Quan Masters, and then I swear we'll get to our sign off. But one thing that comes up is like the voice acting, and people have a lot of opinions about the voice acting. And for me, the first time I played was with the voice acting. I realized that was inserted later. But as far as I'm concerned, that voice acting is great. And for some people, they would say, oh, that voice acting is terrible. There's the full spectrum. One thing I can't help but wonder about, and even came up in our talk today, is Well, the voice actors were mostly just the developers. There were a few people who got hired, but there were a lot of developers just doing voices. Paul did voices, Errol, I think Errol contributed some voices. Greg Johnson contributed voices. Did they just do such a good job because they were intimately involved with the development of the game and they knew exactly, even if they weren't a professional voice actor, they knew what that character should be feeling and they got to create it in their minds? Is that part of it? I mean, I make idle threats about doing all the voices in the game to our community just as a joke. But, I maybe have the acting part down. I definitely don't have the voice part. But, I go, wow, is that just a product of that creative process? And did anybody know that was going to work out, or did it just happen? And, you kind of have to look back and cut ourselves some slack. And it's hard, especially when we're like, talk about a game I don't want to follow up. I would much rather go make 3 mistake games and then approach the Ur-Quan Masters. Sometimes there's mornings I wake up and I'm like, sequel to beloved game. Why am I working on this? This is terrible. I'm going to get castigated, whatever I do. Right. I'll never please everyone, and I used to DJ.
Just announce a tie-in, say that we're now doing the Ur-Quan minions with it in association with Dreamwork, with Illumination. Like all of the characters are now the little yellow guys.
We're actually selling everybody to Fortnite. So, that's how we're funding the project. I hope you enjoy seeing, Fliffo running around in Fortnite. Actually, that might make me laugh. But
you've heard of free to play. Well, how about free to fly?
What about the opposite of free to play? Pay to play. It's where we pay you to play it and promote it, and then you make stuff for us now. No, I'm not going to come up with a crypto scheme to sell this game, although we did have a joke idea about that, which I won't share. But I think it could get it. Well, we're run by a lawyer first, then we'll talk about it. Anyway, jokes aside, thank you for spending so much time talking with me. I realized
it's been a fun chat.
It was really fun, yeah. And I'm I just want to say too, I'm looking forward to your game. I'm really excited Ben is working on it too. And I love, actually, I think you brought up, it's Adventure X, the con. Yeah, you gave a talk at Adventure X. That's on YouTube.
I've done a few things at Adventure X.
Okay, well, I've watched one and it sits with me about comedy and
yes, the comedy on Monkey Island. About how you have to set up a joke rather than just doing a snark line or a quip.
Yeah, and I think about it even I don't know if you follow Yahtzee's content, and he brought up how he's tired of quippy games and quippy movies and Marvel movies kind of creating a formulaic quip thing. And I just think about that video is very inspiring to me.
Well, I mean, again, not to get to the trouble, but one of my kind of cardinal rules is snark is easy and it's boring. You can have one snarky character, but if everybody is just trying to be Joss Whedon, it is the most boring and irritating game imaginable. And it is much harder, but much more interesting to write characters who like each other.
Yes. Yeah. But can still be funny. And that's the challenge too. Like you said, in that video, I think you did a great job with your explanation and dissection, all of that.
Oh, thank you so much.
I would encourage everybody to watch that. If you're watching this recording now and you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll put a link to it or something. But seriously, everybody watching this, go watch it. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And
thank you.